Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. Making a quarterback switch is something that is done carefully and after a lot of deliberation. When you go from one quarterback to another, it's different from making switches to the depth chart at other positions. Because when you switch quarterbacks, you're essentially handing the keys of the team over. The quarterback is the signal caller, and is the most important player on the field, so going from one to another, especially when you're going from a veteran to a newer player, is something that is not done lightly, because you're switching the heartbeat of the team. In other words, 99.9% of the time, it's not a decision that you make at 3 o'clock in the morning because you had a bad dream and couldn't fall back to sleep. Now amazingly, you would think that number would be 100%. Could you imagine Bill Belichick last season saying, completely unironically, and without any hint of sarcasm and joking whatsoever, that the reason he decided to start Mac Jones at quarterback instead of Cam Newton was because he had a bad night of sleep, and this was the way that he could calm himself so he could go back to bed? No, you couldn't. It would be ridiculous. Yet, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, in 1968, that's exactly what happened with the Cleveland Browns. Because in 1968, head coach Blanton Collier decided to make the switch at quarterback because he had one of the worst nights of sleep in his life. And amazingly enough, the decision proved to be an extremely fruitful one. This is the story behind the craziest quarterback switch in the history of the Cleveland Browns, and maybe the history of the NFL, considering just how absurd it truly is. Before I talk about the actual switch in question, we need some context to understand the original starting quarterback, and how he was doing not just in his career, but in this season. The year is 1968, and commanding the Browns at quarterback is this man right here. This is veteran quarterback Frank Ryan, and after the Browns acquired him in 1962, he established himself as one of the best quarterbacks in all of football. Obviously, Otto Graham is the best quarterback in Browns history, but there are a few guys vying for that number 2 spot. And while some guys will get consideration, like Milt Plum and Bernie Kosar, a lot of people would probably say that Ryan was the second best quarterback that the team ever had, which is incredibly high praise, considering the fact that the team has been around for roughly 75 years. Because throughout his career, especially once Blanton Collier became the head coach in 1963, Ryan was not just successful from an individual perspective, but was instrumental in helping the Browns be one of the best teams in football. Just to run you through some of the highlights of Ryan's career with the Browns at the time, to give you an idea of how good he was, in 1963, he threw 25 touchdown passes, which ranked 3rd in the NFL, and tied the franchise record held by Otto Graham for most touchdown passes in a single season. He also finished the year with a passer rating of 90.4, which was the second best total in the NFL, only behind future Hall of Famer Y.A. Tittle of the New York Giants. For an encore in 1964, Ryan was even better. Once again, he threw 25 touchdown passes, although this time, the 25 touchdowns led the entire NFL. He made it to the first Pro Bowl of his career, and got the Browns to the NFL Championship against the Baltimore Colts, where they won 27-0, and where Ryan threw 3 touchdown passes and posted a passer rating of 117.1, winning the battle against Johnny Unitas. Frank Ryan was not just a great quarterback who was one of the best in football, but now he was an NFL champion. He had another Pro Bowl season in 1965, where he once again guided the Browns to the NFL Championship, although this time they would lose to the Green Bay Packers. And in 1966, for the 3rd straight season, Ryan would make the Pro Bowl after a record-breaking season. Because in 1966, Ryan led the entire NFL with 29 passing touchdowns, and finished 2nd in the NFL with 2,974 passing yards, which only ranked behind future Hall of Famer Sonny Jurgensen. On top of that, the 29 touchdowns set a Browns franchise record, and to this day, even though the season has expanded from 14 games to 17 games, and even though the game has evolved drastically to become passer-friendly, this is still the second best season by any quarterback in Browns history from a touchdowns perspective, as the only quarterback to eclipse this mark was Brian Sipe, who threw 30 touchdowns in 1980 en route to an MVP season, and that was a 16-game season. And to put that season into some further perspective, excluding the AFL, his 29 passing touchdowns was the 6th highest total in NFL history at the time. Safe to say, Ryan was a really good quarterback who was easily one of the best in the NFL. Now, 1967 wasn't the best year by his standards, as he only completed 48.6% of his passes, which was his lowest completion percentage since joining the Browns. He posted a passer rating of 72.7, which was his worst passer rating since joining the Browns, and he threw 20 touchdowns to 16 interceptions, which was his worst touchdown to interception ratio since Collier became the head coach. However, he still guided the Browns to the postseason. He didn't throw an interception in his final 4 regular season games, and he was still putting up numbers that half the teams in the league would love to get out of their quarterback. So even if he wasn't quite as good in 1967, and even if he was on a bit of a decline, he was still a solid quarterback. And the one thing you can't deny about Ryan is the fact that he was a winner. From the time Collier became the head coach in 1963 until 1967, Ryan started 66 regular season games. In that stretch, he went 48-17-1, winning an astonishingly high 73.5% of the games that he started. When your quarterback is playing well, and when you're winning 3 out of every 4 games, yeah, that's really good. But why do I bring all of this up? Because things went incredibly south in 1968. And I mean incredibly south. To start off the 1968 season, Ryan was looking like a shell of his former self. Any goodwill he had developed throughout the mid-1960s as one of the best quarterbacks in the game was gone by this point, as he was now the subject of boos and harsh criticism. What was once the face of the franchise and the first name you thought of when you thought of the current Cleveland Browns was now nothing. After the first game of the season, where the Browns won 24-10 in a game where Ryan only completed 50% of his passes, he followed that up with a blowout 28-7 loss in Week 2 against the Dallas Cowboys, where he got sacked 4 times, with one of those sacks resulting in a scoop and score. And in their home debut in Week 3 against the Los Angeles Rams, he put on an absolute stinker, as in a 24-6 loss, he went 3 for 13, completing 23% of his passes while getting sacked 4 times and posting a passer rating of 46.2. The odds that a passing play would result in a sack were higher than the odds of it resulting in a completion. That's how bad he was. And when you consider the fact that the only touchdown came on a 57-yard throw to Paul Warfield, the Browns literally did not call a single play inside of Los Angeles territory. 0 plays past the 50. That's pathetic. The game was a train wreck, and the Browns were now 1-2. Amazingly enough, they were still in first place in the Century Division, as every other team was 1-2 besides the Steelers, who were 0-3. But they needed to right the ship, because this start was unacceptable, and this season was shaping up to be the worst of Collier's career. Through 3 games, the Browns had scored just 37 points, averaging 12.3 points per game. That was the worst total in football. And keep in mind that it's even worse when you realize that 7 of those points came on a defensive touchdown in Week 1 against the Saints. So in actuality, the offense only put up 30 points. Collier was in a pickle. On one hand, Ryan had been so good for the team for so long, and Collier was not blaming Ryan for any poor play. On the other hand, Ryan was really struggling, and the offense couldn't move the football whatsoever. They literally had the worst offense in the NFL, and you're not going to win games when you can't move the ball down the field. This left Collier thinking, should he make a quarterback change and go with Bill Nelsen, the former Steelers quarterback that the Browns acquired earlier in 1968, or should he stick with Frank Ryan? Well, he was about to make up his mind and make a decision. And it was all because of a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad night of sleep. When Collier returned to his home after the game and went through his usual routine, he tried to go to sleep. As humans, we need sleep, and Collier needed sleep after a long day where he knew he had a lot of work to do if he was going to right the ship and try and turn around the Browns following one of their worst starts in franchise history. By the time he went to bed, Ryan was still his starting quarterback. But something happened when Collier's head hit the pillow. For whatever reason, he just couldn't sleep. He was tossing and turning, and just couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. He was up all night, not by choice, but just because his body didn't want to cooperate with him. And what was the thing keeping him up at night and giving him the nightmares? It was none other than the play of his starting quarterback, Frank Ryan. After one of the worst nights of sleep in Collier's life, he knew what he had to do. Because not only was Ryan costing the team on the field, but he was costing Collier some valuable sleep. At 3 a.m., after hours upon hours of not being able to go to bed, he decided that it was time to make a change. Think of what happens at 3 a.m. For 99% of the population, They're either sleeping, or if you're Patrick Starr, you're eating a Krabby Patty.
Who wants a Krabby Patty at 3 in the morning?
Oh boy, 3 a.m.
They're not making life-altering decisions at that hour. Yet for Blanton Collier, literally at 3 a.m., thanks to a horrible night of sleep, he decided to make the switch. As Collier said, "I got up and kept thinking about it. At 3 o'clock, I finally decided we had to make a change." Just like that, Frank Ryan was out, and Bill Nelsen was in. All because Collier had the worst night of sleep of his life. Collier added on the decision, "This is not an effort to place the blame on one individual, but we're not winning, and we've got to see if we can start moving the ball. We can't stand pat. These decisions are not the results of one-game affairs. I want to win, and I think this club is capable of winning." But it was now clear. For Week 4, Bill Nelsen would be making his first start. Frank Ryan, the franchise quarterback, would be riding the pine. Now usually, decisions made at 3 o'clock in the morning are not very good ones. They're often detrimental in one way or another. This is one of the rare exceptions to the rule, because Collier's sleep deprivation turned out to be the turning point of the season. Because after Collier made the switch from Ryan to Nelsen, the team immediately turned things around. For their Saturday night contest against the Pittsburgh Steelers, they won 31-24, getting back to 500 thanks to a solid game by Nelsen against his old team, where he went 16 for 25 with 190 yards. Nelsen started the rest of the season, and the team went 9-2 in that stretch, including an amazing 8-game winning streak at one point where they looked like the best team in football, even defeating the Baltimore Colts, giving them their first and only loss of the regular season. The offense was firing on all cylinders. It had a 3-game stretch in November where they scored at least 45 points in 3 consecutive games. Over the first 3 games of the season, the Browns had the worst offense in football, scoring 37 points. Over the final 11 games of the season, the Browns scored 357 points, coming out to an average of 32.5 points per game. By the time the season ended, the Browns had the 3rd best offense in football, and averaged more points over the final 11 games than any other team in the league. That's quite the effective quarterback switch. The Browns won the Century Division, fending off a fierce charge from the 9-4-1 St. Louis Cardinals. They got revenge on the Dallas Cowboys for what happened in Week 2 by winning in the divisional round, and made it to the NFL Championship, where they lost to the Baltimore Colts. And Nelsen would go on to have a great career in Cleveland, making it to the Pro Bowl the following year in 1969, while Frank Ryan would never start another game again, playing the final 2 seasons of his career in Washington before hanging it up after 1970. As a side note, to learn more about the career of Bill Nelsen, click the card in the upper right corner. The move by Collier to switch from Ryan to Nelsen at the start of October was one of the most effective and well-executed midseason quarterback swaps in NFL history, as the offense literally went from worst to first after the move. And when you truly think about how it all went down, it's absolutely absurd. There are some roster hypotheticals that get mentioned often, like what if Drew Bledsoe never got hurt in Week 2 of the 2001 season? What if Trent Green never got hurt in the 1999 preseason? And so on. But this is one of them that you never see mentioned, and has been lost throughout NFL history, even though it might be the most absurd one of them all. What if Collier actually got a good night of sleep? Ryan remains the starter. The Browns probably don't turn it around. The Browns missed the playoffs since the Cardinals would have won the division, and the Browns don't beat the Colts in the regular season, meaning that the Colts probably enter the Super Bowl as an undefeated team. There's a lot to think about here. Usually, a bad night of sleep is not a good thing. But for the Cleveland Browns, one bad night of sleep by their head coach completely saved their season. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.